You could feel it underneath your feet this week again. The ground is shifting. One inspection that could rattle the GLP-1 supply for Ozempic and Wegovy. One scan misread for cancer in a GLP-1 patient could change how GLP-1 patients are screened forever. One study reminded us that the scalpel is still mightier than the pen when it comes to durable weight loss. And one new guideline put GLP-1s back on top. That's 4 tremors in 7 days for those of you who are counting along, and you can hear what's coming. The fault line that we live on between the science that we love about obesity medicine and the system that was built to serve it up to us is constantly fracturing. I'm Dave Knapp. This is the Weekly Dose podcast, and we're here to talk about obesity medicine from the patient's side of the pen.
Welcome to the On the Pen podcast with your host, Dave Knapp.
Just when it seemed like the GLP-1 supply, specifically for Ozempic and Wegovy, was finally it was good and it was going to be good forever, the FDA quietly, because we all know that these don't make a lot of fanfare in the news, dropped its harshest classification yet on one of Novo Nordisk's largest manufacturing sites. That's the one in Bloomington, Indiana, and a plant that they acquired through their acquisition of Catalent. Now, you guys remember all that? We covered it extensively for the last year and a half, where Eli Lilly said we're going to build a whole bunch of manufacturing in the U.S. Novo Holdings parent company and Novo Nordisk said we're actually going to acquire a company called Catalent, which is one of the world's largest manufacturers, not only for generic drugs, but one of the world's largest manufacturers in support of other pharmaceutical companies to help them make their medication. And this specific plant and Catalent in general have run afoul of the FDA many times. So this acquisition was always sort of a risky one when it comes to PR, especially PR for Novo Nordisk, who has spent millions and millions of dollars to cascade all compounds as inherently and intrinsically unsafe. So the term that the FDA used here was the OAI. That actually stands for Official Action Indicated. So let's back it up to understand like how serious that is, because it just sounds like an official mumbo jumbo statement, right? But if you actually understand the scale of sort of these determinations that the FDA makes, it helps you to understand how important this is. So when the FDA inspects a plant, they basically give you one of 3 potential outcomes. The first one is going to be NAI. That means no action indicated. It means the facility passed, it's in compliance, and they're following all the good manufacturing practices that they need to follow. The second one is VAI, which means voluntary action indicated. Means exactly what it sounds like. That means there were problems, but the company can fix them voluntarily. They don't need to have any sort of formal enforcement action associated with it. And then there's OAI, the official action indicated, the one that Novo received on this Bloomington, Indiana plant. That's the red light. It means that the FDA found conditions that are unacceptable and require official enforceable correction. It's one step away from warning letters, consent decrees, or even product seizures. So when you hear OAI, don't think just a formality and paperwork. Think the FDA actually just told Novo, you have major compliance failures and now you're on notice. If you go back to the inspection that they found, this is going back a couple of months, they found human hair, they found cat hair, even insects in vial components and classified clean rooms, equipment leaks, maintenance lapses, repeated complaints about foreign matter in lots going back to 2022. Again, that way predates Novo Nordisk, but they're now owned by Novo Nordisk. And yet these plants still stayed in operation. That's how fragile the supply chain is to our drugs in the United States, that we can have cat hair, human hair, insects in sterile vial components and classified clean rooms, but we're not going to shut it down, right? Now, the OAI doesn't automatically shut down a plant. It actually triggers a cascade of sort of corrective actions that the FDA implements with these companies, FDA re-inspections and the risk of halted approvals, which is happening. Some of the companies that rely on this specific Catalent site or Novo Nordisk / Catalent site are now experiencing FDA delays in the approvals of their medications because they simply lack the ability to make them effectively, efficiently, and safely. So historically, facilities with this OAI status have seen partial pauses lasting anywhere from months to several months while they clean up and revalidate their processes. So when you hear people say shortage in the future, it's not a total blackout for this plant. It's turbulence and potential disruption in delayed lots and redirected production of medication. Now, this is not a small plant. It's one of Novo Catalent's largest U.S. manufacturing hubs, and it produces both GLP-1 components, Ozempic and Wegovy, and finish and fill work partners like Regeneron and Scholar Rock. So the bottom line is, will this interrupt supply? It's not going to shut them down, but it ultimately could. It ultimately could. And this has been ongoing since 2022. Could that play into the future supply of Ozempic and Wegovy? TBD on that. But here's the real irony for me in this whole story. This is the part of the FDA system that works. You might say, Dave, this is why we want FDA approved drugs, because they get inspected by the FDA and they find these things. Because this is an FDA inspected $1 billion state of the art plant, and it still had hair and bugs in the process line. Novo, however, has spent the better part of the last year and a half throwing stones in a glass house, right? 120 stones to be specific, 120 plus lawsuits against compounders with millions and millions of dollars spent on campaigns that have castigated all compounded versions of semaglutide as intrinsically and inherently unsafe for patients, even though we know over 80 million doses of compounds were sold last year alone from 503A pharmacies. Pretty staggering number if you ask me. And I think the intrinsically unsafe part would have reared its ugly head at this point. But imagine with me for a second, if you will, if this report came from a compounding pharmacy, Novo would have absolutely plastered it across the headline in the media, which is bought, sold, paid for, signed, sealed, and delivered by Big Pharma. And it would have said, cat hair. See why compounds are so dangerous? You don't see that. We're not seeing that largely across our nightly news. We're not seeing that on a Hulu special. Did y'all catch The Dark Shot on Hulu? I just checked this out. You'll have to check it out. It's about a 20-minute piece that Hulu did this past week I think it was called The Dark Shot. And I watched it while I was closing our camper down this weekend. And man, was it a disingenuous Big Pharma puff piece. I digress. They couldn't even get a quote from the FDA on this, by the way, which I found very interesting, probably because they know what we know, and that this was bought and paid for by Big Pharma. But this story isn't about who's winning this big, sort of match between pharma and compounders. It's actually about how Novo and Big Pharma would weaponize the same information if the shoe were on the other foot. To me, that's the big story here. And that's 100% why you come to On the Pen, because we're bringing you coverage that millions and millions of dollars of pharma money didn't shape. So to me, that's the big part of this story, is how this information would have been used if the shoe would have been on the other foot here. And don't you think that we would have heard something pretty incredible in the form of headlines all over the internet about how unsafe compounds are if the shoe were on the other foot? I'm just saying. Folks, this is also why I'm super excited to introduce to you that we have partnered with Shed. That's right. TryShed.com is the newest sponsor of On the Pen. They provide compounded GLP-1s for obesity management, and they back it with a 10% weight loss guarantee or your money back. And that's confidence that is easily measurable for you. Listen, why? Why Shed and why now? Well, hundreds, thousands of people have come to me over the last few months because they've been tired of being stuck in this FDA approved but back ordered, or FDA approved but it's not on my formulary. They're stuck in this world of I need treatment, but I can't get access to it. So who do you trust for compounds, Dave? And that's the question that I kept coming back to. And so I wanted to put in the work to find a company that I trusted. And that's where I found Shed, because I trust the people behind Shed and I trust the way that they're sourcing compounds. They primarily work with Strive Pharmacy, a 503A compound pharmacy that I inherently trust. Again, not all 503As are created equal. I wanted to find somebody that I trusted. But the cool thing about Shed is this other element that they offer that thousands of people are asking me about too. They offer longevity therapies, NAD+, low-dose naltrexone, microdose GLP-1, and they all wrap this in real support with coaching, nutrition guidance, and medical oversight. So you're not just handed a vial and left alone. You're walked through the process by a team of people who just really genuinely care that you get this right. So for too long, patients in the OTP community have been told to sit quietly, wait for access, wait for all this to come around. Coverage is coming. We're done with that. We live in a world where you have the right to pursue care that fits your biology, your goals, and to do it safely and compassionately. That's why I trust Shed. Go to tryshed.com. Use the code OTP25. It's going to save you 25%. If you're going for the branded medication, it's going to save you 25% off the platform fee. There's no platform fee if you're on the compounded version. So you're going to save 25% off that. So OTP25 is the code you're going to use at tryshed.com. More than that, folks, what you're going to experience is what care really feels like when it's actually built around and tailored to you. That's what I'm so excited about with Shed. And the idea of medical empowerment isn't some radical idea. It's just long overdue. And Shed is helping to make that real for patients. Of course, if you're going to change therapy or start a new therapy, you need to always consult the medical professionals in your life. Make sure that your doctors are keyed into everything that you're taking, and always look at the potential side effects of things that you're offering. Of course, compounds are outside of the FDA. They're not FDA approved treatments, but they are helping a lot of people in the OTP community. That's what I hear each and every day. Super excited to be partnering with Shed on this new endeavor. So welcome, Shed, to the OTP podcast. Now, while Novo's cleaning up its plant, another kind of cleanup is happening. And this time it's inside of hospitals and imaging centers. So we brought this story to you earlier this week, and this one is fascinating. So it follows some new research out of the European Association of Nuclear Medicine. And they found that GLP-1 drugs can actually cause false positives on PET scans. And these are the same scans that doctors use to look for cancer, inflammation, and organ damage. So here's what happens here. These tests use a radioactive sugar tracer. They're called tracers, right? You consume this sugar tracer. It's radioactive. And so it lights up on the imaging. And it lights up to see which cells in your body are burning the most energy. And cancer cells usually light up because they consume a ton of glucose. But GLP-1s actually change how our bodies use sugar energy so that muscles and heart tissue and even brown fat can start to glow on this imaging. To a radiologist who doesn't know you're on a GLP-1, again, that's why you need to always consult a medical professional. Always bring your primary care doctor into the fold when you're taking a medication, especially a new medication like a GLP-1. But the radiologist who doesn't know you're on these medications can see these glowing spots, and it looks like potential trouble, which could lead to a whole host of follow-up tests, a whole bunch of concern, and all of it probably unnecessary. Now, you might say, Dave, what happens? Like, how do they tell if you have cancer? Well, first of all, there's other tests that can be run. And if they know that you're on a GLP-1, they're going to be looking for specific patterns on these images rather than just one area that's glowing. And so they're going to be able to read that correctly and interpret that correctly in light of the information that you're on a GLP-1. So if you have a scan scheduled, tell every single person in the room, hey, these medications, I'm on one of them. I'm on a GLP-1. Tell the nurse, tell the tech, the radiologist, Even the person checking in on you to make sure that your garment fits nicely and that you were able to stomach the glucose test. One line in your chart, just one line, this person's on a GLP-1, could actually save you, well, it could save you the trouble and concern, right? First of all, but it's going to save you money too. At the end of the day, who wants to be using their insurance when they don't need to? So save yourself from that. This is what the learning curve of these medications hitting the real world looks like, right? We're just kind of winging it with some of this stuff. But thankfully for these folks at the European Association of Nuclear Medicine, they were able to identify this in the real world. Now, it's not changing anything in terms of treatment. This isn't a concern for cancer or an elevated concern for cancer. It's just false positives that they're worried about on these tests. And so I'm sure that over time, the guidance on this will change, sort of as the guide. It reminds me a lot of the guidance that we've gotten on being on a GLP-1 before like a surgery that you're going to go under anesthesia for, right? That science has been sort of like evolving because it's not something somebody thought of beforehand, right? So in a lot of ways, this stuff is learn as we go, and this is just another example. Now, meanwhile, as the world debates these shots and these shortages and personalized medications, surgeons are actually reminding everyone that the gold standard in chronic weight management hasn't actually changed yet, right? Some of these treatments that are in the pipeline, we talked about retatrutide last week. We've been talking about retatrutide for 2 years. We've been talking about retatrutide since it was retatrutide back like 3 years ago when I was making content about this, when no one else was talking about it. These new treatments could rival these, and we've talked about some other things too, but it's important to note this past week, a small study or a report out of South Korea found that patients undergoing metabolic surgery lost about 30% of their total body weight, about twice what they're seeing in clinic on GLP-1 therapy, and they kept it off. So that finding actually echoes a lot of global data that we've seen, studies in the Lancet, JAMA, Annals of Surgery and Medicine. They show the same thing: sleeve gastrectomy, gastric bypass, duodenal switch. They remain the most durable tools for sustained weight loss and diabetes remission. So surgery works because it doesn't just shrink the stomach, it reprograms biology. Again, this was like my watershed moment. The reason that I'm on a GLP-1 today is because first, before the GLP-1 was offered, surgery was offered to me. I just didn't have coverage for it. And when I didn't have coverage, the doctor basically said, well, hey, there's these new medications that are accomplishing hormonally for people similar results to what happens with the surgery. And so that was the point where I started to learn that it was actually a balancing of hormones, because again, obesity is a chronic, relapsing, multifactorial disease. So it stands to reason that you would have dysregulated hormones, right? All this starting to make sense with some of you out there. That these surgeries were actually addressing a hormonal issue, right? But not everyone can go under the knife, which brings us to the back to, I should say, the story from last week about Revita. And we've been talking for the last few weeks, starting 2 or 3 weeks ago, that we had Dr. Harith Rajagopalan from Fractal Health on talking about Revita, which is a minimally invasive endoscopic outpatient procedure that resurfaces the duodenum. Now they also have the Revita program, they have the Rejuva program, they also have these programs that are actually teaching your body to make more GLP-1 and GIP endogenously when you eat. But the Revita program, which is the resurfacing of the duodenum, which is this part of your stomach. Well, actually, it's the end of your stomach, start of your intestines, actually senses the nutrients that you eat. And this little procedure just resurfaces the mucosal lining. And in doing so, gives you new cells that are like fresh and working and can sense the nutrients you're eating, and helps to your body to respond hormonally appropriately. So anyways, there's a lot of stuff to say. That what I get excited about is the blending of these two worlds, the blending of the idea of these hormonal imbalances that these medications address, while being able to accomplish that in a more, let's call it, natural state of your body with a minimally invasive procedure. Because I think for me, and I know for a lot of people, when we talk about access to surgery, for me, it was an issue of access with my insurance coverage. But for many people, they just don't like the idea of having their anatomy rearranged, right? But for perhaps a minimally invasive procedure that resurfaces the duodenum might be more appealing to somebody, something they can prepare for overnight, go in kind of like a colonoscopy prep, right? And similarly be out the door in a similar time to what you'd be out the door with for a colonoscopy. So I think that might just be the way for some people. And that's what gets me excited about Fractal. So this bridge between injections and surgery, not lifelong dependence on a drug if that's not what you want. I know for many of you, you're like, from my cold dead hands, Dave, we're not even talking about these things. I don't care. Give me my shot. Give me my weekly shot. And don't you dare think about taking away. I get it. We love these medications. But for those who are looking for a little something more, I get excited about the future. But let's talk about claimable real quick, because claimable, when we talk about losing access or not having access to a particular treatment or a treatment or a different medication that we may need to treat the chronic disease of obesity. Listen, if your insurance has denied you GLP-1, don't take no as a final answer. That's what the insurance companies are literally banking on. They're banking on you just giving up. 90% of claims go 90% of claim denials go unfought and uncontested. Claimable actually helps patients appeal that insurance denial with the right codes, the right studies, the right law, the right language, and they submit that on your behalf. With, at least for diabetics, it's over 80% get their GLP-1 back. For obese community, the last number we got was over 50% of the denials that claimable is helping to fight are actually getting beat. We know that they've brought lawsuits against CVS Caremark, who in their estimation illegally took people off of Zepbound. So they're fighting the fight. And last week we learned from Morris that there's more lawsuits forthcoming. So they're literally fighting the fight. So if you want to get access to that branded medication, but you have failed to do so through the means that you've tried, give Claimable a chance. Go to getclaimable.com /OTP for On the Pen. If you use code OTP10, you're going to save 10%. And you're going to support the work that we do, whether you're working with Shed or Claimable or Shape'a. If you use any of our sponsors, you're supporting the work that we do. And it's definitely a form of advocacy. If you're going to use something, why not use something that helps us to do our job better here at On the Pen? Thank you to Claimable for sponsoring us. And finally, this last headline that quietly changes everything for people over in the EU. The European Association for the Study of Obesity has officially, finally, declared semaglutide and tirzepatide the first line medications for obesity and most of its related condition. That means that for sleep apnea, osteoarthritis of the knee, prediabetes, cardiovascular disease, MASH, these drugs are no longer a last resort. It's where care should begin. So for decades, patients have been told to try harder first, diet, exercise, all of those things. And you see where that advice has gotten us, right? Because people need more. They need tools, and the tools have arrived, and they've arrived in these pretty little pens. If you live in the EU, they've arrived in a one monthly pen that is adjustable. Would love to have one of those here, just saying. But this is fantastic news because we have the tool now. And so the guidance has flipped in the EU, and it says start with biology, not blaming patients. So published in Nature Medicine, the new algorithm aligns each medication with the complication that it treats best. So for example, we know we have really good data on tirzepatide and mild to moderate obstructive sleep apnea, but we know we have even better cardiovascular data for Ozempic and Wegovy. So it's going to take the medication that aligns with the complications that the patient's having and align the patient with the best treatment. And while this is European, don't underestimate the reach of this, because US payers also watch these updates. When global standards start to shift, and we saw this with the WHO this past couple of months, adding their list of essential medicines, GLP-1 medications for obesity, these little wins add up to really big wins in the conversation about accessibility. So if you're fighting for coverage, bring this to your doctor. Of course, Claimable will include all of this information for you in their very reasonable fee. I think it's like $40. Fight your appeal, potentially get your medicine back. Ask them to cite it in your chart, right? So if you have sleep apnea, if you have MASH, if you have cardiovascular disease, make sure this thing is well documented in your chart so that can be used when we bring the fight to the table with Claimable or whoever you're using to fight your prior authorization denials. For one last message for you before we wrap on this podcast this week, I want to give a shout out to the tool that has changed the game for me, the Shape scale. Listen, folks, if you got a really messed up relationship with your scale, you've got to check out Shape. So you can check them out. Type in home.myshape.com/OTP. Put home in there first. What is this? It's a numberless scale, right? You ever step on the scale, you're doing all the right things, and you're just up 5 pounds. And then you're like, screw it. I'm not stepping on this thing again for a week. And a week becomes 2 weeks, and 2 weeks becomes a month. And a month becomes 6. And you haven't stepped on the scale because you don't want to deal that one day, even though maybe intellectually we knew we didn't gain 5 pounds. The frustration gets us. That's me. That's me. If that's you, check out the Shape scale. When I'm engaged with my scale, I'm engaged with my health. I'm making better decisions all day long. And Shape zooms out and gives you a color based upon the pattern of your weight loss. So if you're losing weight, you're in the blue zone. If you're losing a little bit of weight, you're in the teal zone. If you're maintaining, you're in the green. And if you're gaining, you're in the gray. But that doesn't change day to day because it's giving you the snapshot of your broader story. It's giving you patterns, and the Shape scale helps you do that. You can get 30% off using code OTP30. Visit home.myshape.com to learn more about the Shape scale. Love what they're doing at Shape. I get on mine every single day, my friends. That's what we got for you this week. I hope you enjoyed the podcast this week. If you did, consider giving it a 5-star rating and review. Let all your friends know about the podcast. The 5-star rating and reviews really, really help other people discover this. If you find it helpful, it's the number one thing that I ask of you. You don't have to spend a dime to do it. It really supports the work that I do. Listen, I wake up every day. Every day I wake up thinking about what I'm going to bring to you today that's going to be information that empowers you to have better conversations with your doctor and hopefully at the end of the day, better health outcomes for you. Because I know that we're all here to show up for something. We're here to show up for our spouse. We're here to show up for our family. We're here to show up for our community, for our church, for our schools, for whatever it is. The OTP community. You're here to show up for the OTP community. I see you. Those of you who are in the comments every time we drop a video. I'm thinking about Michael. I'm thinking about Sabrina. I'm thinking about so many of you that really, really go the extra mile. Laura, man, there's just so many of you that show up every day to drop a comment. So thank you. Thank you for being here, and thank you for being the best part of what we do it On the Pin. I couldn't, wouldn't, and shouldn't do it without you. Until next week, I'm sure there'll be a ton more to cover, but I appreciate y'all, and we'll catch you on the next one.